Life took an unexpected turn after finding love again with Sarah, a wonderful widow, and her charming son, Leo. Our life together in suburban Georgia felt perfect, a fresh start I desperately needed. But a hidden truth about Leo's past would soon surface, challenging everything I thought I knew about my history and the family we were building. It's a journey through buried secrets and unforeseen connections. My name is Ethan. After a difficult few years, moving to Georgia felt like hitting a reset button. The quiet streets of Savannah offered a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I'd been focused on work, building my small architecture firm, and honestly hadn't thought much about finding someone new. Then I met Sarah. She was introduced through a mutual friend at a local gallery opening. Her smile was warm, and her eyes held a depth that hinted at a life lived with both joy and sorrow. She told me about Leo, her son, a bright 7-year-old who loved dinosaurs and drawing. My heart, which I thought was securely locked away, started to open. We talked for hours that night, discovering shared interests in old films and weekend road trips. The city lights outside the window blurred as we got lost in conversation. It felt easy, natural, unlike anything I'd experienced before. We started seeing each other regularly, exploring the historic squares of Savannah, trying new restaurants, and simply enjoying each other's company. It wasn't long before I knew this was something special. Leo was shy at first, but he warmed up to me quickly, his initial reservations melting away as we bonded over building elaborate Lego castles and exploring the local parks. Seeing Sarah and Leo together, witnessing their easy affection and shared laughter solidified my feelings. This wasn't just about finding a partner. It was about finding a family. We decided to take the next step, blending our lives, and I moved into their cozy house just outside the city center. Life felt complete. Our life settled into a rhythm of happy normalcy. Mornings were coffee and cartoons with Leo, evenings spent on the porch watching the sunset. Sarah worked as an elementary school teacher, passionate about her job. I was busy with my architecture firm, but always hurried home to our little family. One evening, while we were making dinner, Leo pulled out a box of old photographs from a closet. "Mom, look," he exclaimed, scattering the pictures across the table. Sarah and I leaned over them, looking at the time-worn, faded images. One photo showed Sarah, much younger with long hair and a shy smile. Standing next to her was a man I had never seen before. He was holding a baby in his arms. "That's Dad when I was little," Leo said softly, pointing to the man. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at Sarah, raising an eyebrow in question. She looked away, and I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. That was a long time ago, Ethan," she started, her voice shaky. Before all of this, I felt the ground shifting beneath me. There were more questions than I could form, fear seeping through me like a cold fog. Who was this man? Why had I never heard about him? And what did this mean for us, for the family we were building? I couldn't pinpoint the exact feeling, whether it was jealousy or confusion, but I knew this was the beginning of something significant. Sarah took my hand, and in her eyes I saw pain and desperation. "We need to talk," she said. "I need to explain everything to you." We moved to the living room, the photographs still scattered on the dining table, like forgotten fragments of a different life. The air felt heavy, thick, with unspoken history. Sarah sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor. Say waited, trying to keep my expression neutral, but inside, a knot of anxiety was tightening in my chest. She took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping slightly. "His name was David," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "The man in the picture, Leo's father." Leaf unexpectedly washed over me for a second. At least I knew who he was, but then the underlying tension returned. There was still something she wasn't saying, something crucial. "He passed away a few months before Leo was born," she continued, her voice gaining a little strength but tinged with sadness. "It was sudden, an accident." My heart went out to her. Losing a partner before your child is born, having to face single parenthood. While grieving, it was an unimaginable hardship. I reached across and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," I said, genuinely meaning it. "You went through all of that alone." She nodded, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "It was the hardest time of my life," she confessed. "Raising Leo. It saved me, but it was also incredibly difficult." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her past hanging between us. I thought about the strength it must have taken for her to overcome such a loss and build a life for herself and Leo. I admired her resilience. But as I looked at the picture again, at the baby in David's arms, a strange feeling of familiarity pricked at the back of my mind. The feeling of familiarity wouldn't leave me. It was like a name on the tip of your tongue, just out of reach. I kept glancing at the photograph, trying to place it, trying to understand why seeing this unknown man with a baby felt so significant. Sarah was talking about her early struggles as a single mother, the kindness of friends who helped her, the challenges of balancing work and childcare in Charleston, where she lived before moving to Savannah. Charleston, that city name snagged my attention. I used to travel there frequently for work projects around that time, roughly 8 years ago. It wasn't a city I spent a lot of personal time in, mostly just quick trips for site visits and client meetings. But the mention of Charleston, combined with the nagging familiarity of the baby in the photo, sent a chill down my spine. I tried to remember my life back then. It felt like a different era before the heartbreak that led me to move to Georgia. There were late nights at the office, lonely hotel rooms, and a brief whirlwind romance that ended as quickly as it began. A woman I met during one of those Charleston trips. Her name, it was Jessica. We had a few intense weeks together, fueled by proximity and perhaps a shared loneliness, but it fizzled out. No hard feelings, just an understanding that it wasn't meant to be long-term. We lost touch completely after that. It felt insignificant at the time, just a fleeting connection. But now, sitting here, looking at this picture, listening to Sarah talk about Charleston and the timing, a terrifying thought began to form. The terrifying thought was simple, yet utterly earth-shattering. Could Jessica be Leo's mother? And if so, who was the man in the photo? See, Jessica's partner, her husband, Sarah, had said his name was David, Leo's father. My mind was racing, trying to fit the pieces together. If Sarah lived in Charleston when Leo was born, around the same time I was having that brief relationship there, what were the chances? It felt too coincidental to ignore, but also too incredible to be true. I stole another glance at the photo. David seemed kind, his smile gentle. Did I ever meet him through Jessica? No, I was certain I hadn't. Jessica had never mentioned a long-term partner, let alone a husband. Your connection, though, brief, felt private, separate from complicated entanglements. How long did you live in Charleston? I asked Sarah, trying to keep my voice casual, as if just making polite conversation about her past. She paused, thinking, oh, for about 2 years before moving here, she replied. We moved shortly after David passed, 2 years. That timeline lined up unsettlingly well with my own trips there. I looked at Leo, who was now engrossed in drawing at the nearby table. Did I see any part of myself in him? I hadn't really looked before, not in that way. Saw Sarah's eyes, her nose. Kids often favor one parent strongly, but now I studied his features, searching for a hint, a resemblance, anything that might connect him to me. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Sarah's story of meeting David, his sudden passing, raising Leo alone, it was a narrative of loss and resilience. But how did Jessica fit in? Was there a connection? Was it possible that David wasn't Leo's biological father at all, but someone else Sarah was with? And if so, could the real father be someone she knew from Charleston? Someone like me, the idea felt absurd, like a plot from a movie, yet the unease persisted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something vital, a piece of the puzzle that would either dismiss my terrifying suspicion or confirm it entirely. I looked at Sarah again. She was talking about the challenges of finding affordable childcare in Charleston. Could I ask her more about David without raising suspicion? What did he do? How long were they together? These felt like natural questions about the man she'd loved and lost, the father of her child. What did David do? I asked hesitantly, trying to sound genuinely interested in her past. Sarah smiled faintly, a sad kind of smile. He was a musician, she said. Played guitar in a few local bands. He was incredibly talented, but never really caught a big break. A musician in Charleston. That didn't immediately ring any bells related to my life or Jessica. Jessica was a graphic designer, working for a small agency downtown. No obvious connection there. I felt a brief flicker of relief, thinking maybe I was just paranoid, connecting dots that weren't there, but the relief was fleeting. The timelines, the city, the baby's face that felt strangely familiar. It was too much to dismiss completely. The idea that my brief encounter with Jessica in Charleston could be linked to Sarah and Leo was still almost impossible to accept, but it had lodged itself in my mind. The relief from hearing David was a musician was temporary. It didn't rule out anything. People have different circles, and maybe Jessica knew David or Sarah through mutual friends, or maybe there was no direct link, just a cruel twist of fate with overlapping timelines in the same city. I excused myself to get some water, my mind buzzing. How could I find out more without turning our comfortable evening into an interrogation? I didn't want to upset Sarah, especially after she had just opened up about a painful part of her past, but I felt an overwhelming need for clarity. I thought about David the musician. Was he locally known? Could I find anything about him online? Perhaps look for Charleston bands from around 8 or 9 years ago. It felt like stepping into a minefield. What if I found something that confirmed my fears? What if I found something that shattered everything? The thought of losing Sarah, of disrupting Leo's life, the life we were building, was unbearable. Yet the uncertainty was a heavy weight, pressing down on me. I needed to know the truth, not just for my own peace of mind, but because a secret this big, if it existed, couldn't stay buried forever. It felt fundamentally wrong to build our future on a foundation of potentially hidden history. I decided I would need to be careful, maybe do some quiet searching when I had time alone. The next day at work, during a quiet lunch break, I finally gave in to the gnawing curiosity. I opened my laptop, my hands feeling slightly shaky. This felt like crossing a line, delving into Sarah's past without her knowledge, but the need to understand outweighed my reservations. Started with simple searches: Charleston musician, David Death, Charleston local bands, 2016, trying various combinations of keywords and dates around the time. Sarah said David passed away. The results were overwhelming and frustratingly vague. So many musicians, so many local bands in a city like Charleston. No single David immediately stood out in connection with a reported accident or significant local news story from that period. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. I tried searching for news articles about accidents around that time, hoping to find a name that matched, but that also proved fruitless and felt morbidly intrusive. I then tried a different approach, searching for Sarah's maiden name, which I knew, along with Charleston. This yielded a few generic results, possibly social media profiles that weren't public or mentions in community event listings that weren't specific enough. It felt like hitting a wall. Was David not publicly known? Was his death not reported? Or was I searching for the wrong person entirely? The lack of concrete information didn't ease my mind. It only made the mystery deepen, fueling my suspicion that there was more to this story than Sarah had told me. Hitting a dead end with David felt both frustrating and confirming in a twisted way. If he was indeed a real person and Leo's father who died tragically, wouldn't there be something about him online, especially if he was a musician in a city's local scene? The lack of a clear digital footprint felt strange. My mind inevitably circled back to Jessica, my brief time with her in Charleston was a blur of intense moments fueled by being in a different city and seeking a distraction. I tried to pull up details from my memory. Where did we meet? A bar near the historic district, I think. What did we talk about? Mostly surface level stuff, getting to know each other, work aspirations. Did she ever mention friends? A roommate? I couldn't recall anything specific. We kept things simple, intentionally or not. I hadn't tried to find her online after we stopped seeing each other. There felt like no reason to. Now, there was a terrifying reason. I opened a new tab and typed Jessica's first name, followed by Charleston graphic designer. Again, multiple results. Without a last name, it was impossible to know which, if any, was her. I scrolled through profiles on professional networking sites and social media, looking for a familiar face, a name that sparked recognition. It felt like another shot in the dark, but I had to try the possibility that the woman I had a fleeting romance with years ago in Charleston might somehow be connected to the woman I built a future with in Savannah. And to the child I now considered my son was a reality I was struggling desperately to process. Scrolling through endless profiles didn't yield any leads on Jessica. Without a last name, it was impossible. I closed the laptop, feeling a mix of frustration and a strange, unsettling anticipation. If I couldn't find Jessica, how else could I confirm or deny this terrifying possibility? I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes, trying to transport myself back to that time in Charleston. What details had I overlooked? Was there anything Jessica mentioned that might now seem significant? We talked about our jobs, our reasons for being in Charleston. She was working on a big project for a local marketing firm. I remembered she was stressed about deadlines. Did she ever mention family, friends, a boyfriend? Not that, I recalled. Our conversations were mostly about the present, about us. I tried to think about specific dates. When exactly was I in Charleston during that period? I had project files from that time stored digitally. Maybe the dates on those files could help pinpoint the time frame of my relationship with Jessica more precisely. And if I could narrow down the dates, I could compare them to Leo's birth date. Sarah had told me Leo was born in early spring. If my time with Jessica aligned with the 9 months prior to that, the possibility became even more chillingly real. I made a mental note to dig into my old project files later, away from the office. This research needed to be done with absolute discretion. The potential consequences of being wrong, or worse, of being right, were monumental. That evening, after Sarah and Leo were asleep, I went down to my home office, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. I powered on my old external hard drive, the one holding archive projects from years past. Navigating through folders, I found the Charleston project's direct from about 8 years ago. I opened the relevant project files, checking the dates of preliminary sketches, client emails, and site visit reports. The timestamps confirmed my frequent travel to Charleston during a specific 3-month period. Leafing through the digital documents, memories of that intense brief time with Jessica resurfaced. I remembered dinners at a small Italian place, walks along the Battery, late-night conversations in her dimly lit apartment. By cross, referencing the project dates with hazy recollections, I was able to narrow down the time frame of our relationship. It spanned roughly 6 weeks within that 3-month window. Then I did the quick, terrifying calculation. A baby born in early spring would have been conceived in late spring or early summer the previous year. The 6-week period I was seeing Jessica in Charleston fell squarely within that window. The overlap wasn't just possible, it was exact. The air in the small office felt thin. It wasn't just a wild coincidence anymore. The timeline fit perfectly. The woman I briefly dated years ago in Charleston, the city where Sarah lived when Leo was conceived and born, during the precise months Leo would have been conceived. It was too much to ignore. The terrifying thought was no longer just a thought, it was a plausible, horrifying possibility. The digital clock on my computer screen glowed, the numbers a stark reminder of the late hour and the secret I now potentially carried. I sat there in the quiet darkness of my office, the confirmed timeline burning in my mind. 6 weeks in Charleston, precisely 9 months before Leo's early spring birthday. It couldn't be a coincidence. The implication was staggering, impossible, yet increasingly undeniable. Leo could be my son, not the son of a man named David, a musician who passed away, but my biological son, a result of a brief, almost forgotten encounter years ago. My head was spinning. How was this possible? How could Sarah, the woman I loved and trusted implicitly, have married me knowing that Leo was my child from a past relationship? Did she know about Jessica? Was Jessica connected to Sarah somehow? Were they friends? Sisters? The questions multiplied, each one more terrifying than the last. The gentle narrative Sarah had shared about David felt like a fragile shield, protecting a truth that was far more complex and for some reason hidden. My hands were shaking again, not from cold, but from the sheer magnitude of the potential revelation. This wasn't just about a hidden past. It was about a fundamental deception at the heart of our relationship, at the core of the family I believed we were building. What did I do now? Do I confront Sarah, lay bare my suspicions, and risk shattering everything? Do I try to find Jessica, the only other person who could potentially confirm or deny this? Or do I bury this knowledge, try to live with the possibility, and pretend I never looked at those old files? Sleep was impossible that night. I lay awake, the weight of the potential truth pressing down on me. Confronting Sarah felt reckless, a potential detonation that could destroy the life we had built in an instant. I needed more than a terrifying timeline. I needed proof, or at least a clearer understanding of how this impossible situation could have come to be. Why would Sarah hide this? If she knew I was Leo's father, why marry me without saying anything? Had she genuinely believed David was the father when she met me, or was this a deliberate, calculated deception? The idea that she might have lied about something so fundamental was a cold, sharp pain. I looked at her sleeping beside me, her face peaceful in the dim light. It was impossible to reconcile the loving, honest woman I knew with someone capable of such a profound secret. I decided I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed more information. Finding Jessica felt like the most direct path to confirmation. She would know if she had a child around that time and who the father was. But finding her without a last name after so many years felt like searching for a ghost. Maybe I could try a different angle. Think about anything specific Jessica told me, any unique detail that might help narrow down the search, anything that could potentially connect her to Sarah's life in Charleston. My mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, each one leading down a path fraught with emotional peril. Searching for Jessica by name alone was futile. I needed something more, a unique identifier. I spent the next few days quietly sifting through memories of that time, trying to conjure up specific details about her. What did we talk about besides work and ourselves? Did she mention her family, where she grew up, her dreams? It was frustrating how hazy some of the details were after so many years. We weren't building a future, we were living in the moment. Then, a small, seemingly insignificant memory surfaced. They were walking near the Charleston City Market one evening, and she pointed out a small, quirky antique shop. She mentioned she loved browse places like that, looking for vintage jewelry, specifically old lockets. It was a small detail, but it felt concrete. I collect them, she had said. Each one tells a story. Could this be a lead? Was there a community of vintage jewelry collectors in Charleston? Could I search for online forums or social media groups related to that? It was a long shot, but it was something. It was a different angle than just searching for her name or profession. The idea of finding her through a shared interest, something she was passionate about, felt less invasive, less like I was digging for a secret, and more like I was trying to find a person I once knew, albeit with incredibly high stakes attached. The hope, faint as it was, fueled a new wave of determination. Armed with this new, albeit slim, lead, I returned to my online searching. This time, I focused on vintage jewelry collector groups and antique shop communities on social media platforms and forums, specifically filtering for those based in or around Charleston, South Carolina. It was a different kind of search, less about names and dates and more about shared interests and community. I joined a couple of public groups and started browse posts, looking for anything that might jog a memory or reveal a connection. It was slow going. Most posts were about recent finds, upcoming antique fairs, or requests for information about specific pieces. I looked at profile pictures and usernames, searching for any hint of the Jessica I knew from years ago. Many profiles used pseudonyms or weren't very detailed. He tried searching within the groups using keywords like locket or vintage jewelry, hoping to find posts from someone passionate about collecting them, but the results were vast and unspecific. It felt like another dead end, a clever idea that led nowhere. Was she still in Charleston? Did she still collect lockets? People change, hobbies fade. Just as I was about to give up, feeling the familiar wave of frustration wash over me, I stumbled upon an old forum thread from about 7 years ago. It was a discussion about a popular antique fair that happened annually in Charleston. One username caught my eye, Gems and Locks. And one of the posts from that user mentioned finding a particularly rare vintage locket. The username itself, Gems and Locks, resonated faintly, like something Jessica might use given her interest. It wasn't a confirmation, not by a long shot, but it was the first potential thread I'd found connected to her unique interest. Following the Gems and Locks username, I clicked on the profile link associated with it. Old forum profiles are often sparse, but sometimes they contain just enough information. This one was basic, a join date, a post count, and a small about me action that was empty. There was no profile picture, no linked website or social media. It was another dead end, or so it seemed. I went back to the forum thread and looked at the user's other posts. There weren't many, just a handful over the course of a year or two, all related to vintage jewelry or antique shops in the Charleston area. One post, however, stood out. It was a reply to someone asking for recommendations for a good, but lesser known, spot to find unique vintage pieces. Sandlocks had replied, recommending a small family-owned shop in a quiet neighborhood slightly outside the main tourist area. They mentioned the owner by his first name, a detail that meant nothing to me, but the description of the shop and its location felt vaguely familiar. It was the kind of place Jessica might have known or even taken me to. I tried searching for the shop online, using the owner's name and the general location mentioned. To my surprise, I found it a quaint little store with a simple website and a few online reviews. I looked at the pictures of the interior, trying to see if it sparked a stronger memory. Nothing definitive, but a lingering feeling of familiarity, like a place I might have seen or been near before. It wasn't the smoking gun I was hoping for, but it was a tangible link to a place in Charleston that someone interested in vintage lockets, potentially Jessica, had recommended. It felt like I was on the right track, however faint the trail. The antique shop felt like the most promising lead so far. It was a physical place, a tangible connection to the world of vintage lockets that Jessica was passionate about. But how could I approach it? Calling felt too direct, too likely to raise questions. Emailing might be better, allowing me to carefully word my inquiry. I decided to draft an email, pretending to be a fellow collector interested in the history of vintage jewelry shops in Charleston. I asked if they kept records of notable pieces they'd sold years ago, or if the owner the Robert mentioned in the forum post had been running the shop for a long time and might remember regular customers who were avid collectors, specifically of lockets from around 8 years prior. He tried to make it sound like a research project for a hobbyist website or something equally innocuous. My finger hovered over the send button for a long time. This was a risk. It could lead nowhere. Or worse, it could somehow backfire and create unforeseen complications. But the need to know was a powerful current pulling me forward. I had to try. I finally sent the email, feeling a surge of nervous energy. Now, all I could do was wait for a response, hoping that Robert was still the owner and had a good memory, or perhaps some old records that might contain a name or a contact detail connected to Gems and Locks, or hopefully to Jessica. The silence that followed the sending of the email was deafening. The waiting was agonizing. Every time my phone buzzed with an email notification, my heart leaped into my throat. Days stretched into a week with no response from the antique shop. I told myself it was a long shot, that the email likely got lost in a spam folder, or that Robert simply didn't have the time or inclination to reply to a stranger's query about old customers. Just as I was starting to lose hope, an email finally arrived with the subject line, "Regarding your inquiry about vintage lockets." My hands trembled as I clicked it open. The email was brief, written in a friendly, slightly informal tone. Robert confirmed he had owned the shop for over 15 years and had indeed had many regular customers who collected vintage jewelry. He said that while he didn't keep detailed records of specific sales or customers from years ago, he did have a vivid memory of a young woman who was particularly passionate about vintage lockets. He described her as having bright, kind eyes and a unique sense of style. He didn't recall her last name, but he did remember her first name, Jessica. He said she was a delightful customer who used to visit his shop fairly regularly for about a year or so, but then she suddenly stopped coming in. He thought she might have moved away, as he never saw her in the neighborhood again. Reading her name, Jessica, written there in black and white in an email from a man in Charleston who remembered a locket collector from 8 years ago, felt like a jolt of electricity. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was a powerful confirmation that the Gems and Locks lead was likely connected to the Jessica I knew, and that she was indeed in Charleston, frequenting an antique shop related to her interest, around the time everything in my life was about to change forever. Reading Robert's email felt surreal. Jessica, in Charleston, collecting lockets. It was too specific, too aligned with my memories and the Bees and Locks username to be a mere coincidence. The woman I'd had that brief, intense connection with years ago was confirmed to be in the right city, with the right unique interest at the right time. The pieces of this impossible puzzle were fitting together in a terrifying way. The confirmation sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me, but also a grim determination. I was closer now. I had a slightly more defined path to follow. So return to the online search, this time armed with more specific keywords. Jessica Charleston Vintage Lockets, Charleston Antique Collector Jessica, Gems and Locks real name. I sifted through social media profiles, online articles about local collectors, anything that might link the name Jessica to the hobby in the city. It was still challenging, like finding a single grain of sand on a vast beach, but the search felt less random, more focused. I also couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. How could she be connected to this? Did she know Jessica? Were they part of the same social circle in Charleston? It felt increasingly unlikely that Sarah's story about David the musician was the complete truth. The possibility of a deliberate deception, of Sarah knowing about my past connection to Jessica and somehow orchestrating this, was a painful thought. But why? What could be the motive behind such an elaborate secret? The question gnawed at me, adding another layer of complexity to the already overwhelming situation. Days turned into a week, then 2. My search for Jessica became an all-consuming obsession conducted in stolen moments when Sarah and Leo were out or asleep. I scoured every corner of the internet I could think of, refining my search terms, cross-referencing names and places. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. While browsing an online archive of a local Charleston lifestyle magazine from several years ago, I stumbled upon a short article about local collectors and their passions. The headline mentioned a few names, and one of them immediately caught my eye: Jessica Advanced. The article featured a small photo of a woman proudly displaying a collection of vintage lockets. It was her, older of course, but unmistakably the Jessica I knew from Charleston. The article mentioned she was a graphic designer and passionate about historical jewelry, volunteering at a local historical society to help catalog their collection. It was dated just a few months before Leo's birthday. This was it. Her last name, a clear recent photo, a confirmed connection to vintage lockets and Charleston history. The article didn't mention anything about a partner or child, but it placed her firmly in Charleston with her same interests. Right before Leo was born, my heart was hammering in my chest. I had found her. Now came the terrifying next step, reaching out. What would I say? How do I ask a woman I haven't spoken to in 8 years if she had a child 9 months after our brief relationship? The implications of that conversation were immense, potentially unraveling the very fabric of my life. Jessica Advanced. The name felt both familiar and foreign after so many years. Finding her last name, seeing her face in that article, it solidified everything. The woman from my brief past in Charleston wasn't a ghost. She was real, still in the city, still pursuing her passion. Now, the abstract fear had a face, a name. The logical next step was to contact her. But the thought of reaching out after 8 years with the potential question I held was daunting. How do you even begin that conversation? I searched for her online using her full name. She had a profile on a professional networking site listing her as a graphic designer in Charleston. She also had a public profile on a popular social media platform filled with pictures of her life, her friends, her collection of lockets. There were no photos of a child, no mention of a husband or partner. It didn't mean anything definitive, of course. People curate their online presence. I decided the professional networking site might be less intrusive than social media for an initial contact after so long. I drafted a message, deleting and rewriting it countless times. How to sound casual, yet convey the importance of the contact. He finally settled on something simple. Hi Jessica, you might not remember me, but we met in Charleston about 8 years ago. My name is Ethan. I came across an old article and recognized you. I was hoping to connect and possibly ask you about something related to that time. Hope you're doing well. He felt inadequate, a massive understatement of the earthquake rumbling beneath my life, but it was a start. With a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, I hit send. The message was out there, floating in the digital ether, carrying the weight of a secret I was desperate to uncover. Now, the hardest part began, waiting for her response. The hours after sending that message stretched into an eternity. Every notification, every email ping felt like a drumbeat echoing the frantic pace of my heart. Had she seen it? Would she respond? What would she say? The uncertainty was a heavy cloak, suffocating me. He went through the motions of my day, playing with Leo, talking with Sarah, all while this enormous potential truth lay hidden, pressing down on me. Then late that afternoon, an email notification popped up with a familiar name. Jessica Advanced. My hands were shaking so violently, I almost dropped my phone. He opened the email, my breath catching in my throat. It was a simple reply, but the words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Hi, Ethan. I do remember you from Charleston. It read, it's been a long time. I'm doing okay, thank you. Regarding something related to that time, I think I know what this might be about. I had a son, born in early spring about 8 years ago. His name is Leo. My vision blurred for a moment. Leo, her son, born at the same time. It couldn't be a coincidence. The email continued, I didn't know how to contact you back then. Things were complicated. I always suspected you might be his father. I'd like to talk if you're open to it. There's a lot to explain. The world outside my office window faded away. Leo, my Leo. The boy I tucked in every night, read stories to, built Lego castles with. He wasn't just my stepson, he was my son. The truth, the terrifying possibility I had been chasing, was confirmed in a few short sentences. The weight of it was immense, crushing. Sarah, David, Jessica, Leo, the tangled threads of our lives woven together in a way I never could have imagined, and Sarah knew, she must have known. The realization left me breathless, staring at the name Leo in the email, the name of the boy sleeping peacefully upstairs, who was unknowingly at the center of this seismic shift in my reality.